I am a student at Drexel University, and so my question was about your comment on, separating religion and politics. So, if we're to separate those two things, how do we make laws on things like abortion? Should it be completely secularized in the laws that we make, or should it be founded on America's Judeo-Christian beliefs?
I think that's a great, great question and a very, very tough one. And let me do my best to answer it. And Vince can feel free to add it as well. When Paul was heading to Rome, and many were dissuading him from going there because they say they would finish him off, he said, I'm going to claim my right as a Roman citizen. I'm going to claim my right as a Roman citizen and argue my case as a citizen of Rome. He didn't say, I'm coming from the church that I planted. He didn't say, I'm representing all the churches that I've planted. I'm coming as a citizen of Rome to claim my right. What happens in a world with so many mixed views today, especially pluralization, where there's a competing number of worldviews available to its members? We ought to speak on these issues as a member of society, as a member of a community, as a member that gives me my right to argue for the child and the unborn and the weak and the most victimized. But if I come speaking because I represent the evangelical church or the Protestant church or the Catholic church or whatever it is, you end up all of a sudden getting people to fight against an institution. I think we must speak what you're saying, and so we must speak our conscience and our conviction and why. And the secularist who tells us we are prejudiced and subjective is just plain wrong. No more subjective than the secularist is going to be. The secularist is also speaking very subjectively. We speak from the objective viewpoint that life has intrinsic worth and intrinsic value, not extrinsic worth conveyed by state or society, but intrinsic worth. We talk so much about human rights, we have forgotten about the right to be human. And so your point is very well taken. I commend you for thinking about that. I just think you speak as one who has a coherent worldview as to why this issue is important, not representing an institution, but representing the absolutes that have built your life, the absolute of dignity, of essential value, of life, of marriage, of home, and of the future. You raise a question right now that is going to have ramifications 10 to 20 years down the line. We're going to find out. Because a worldview is in place right now that seeks to dominate the world. And one of their methods is by raising huge families, you ultimately outnumber the opponents and the opposition. Wouldn't it be ironic that a worldview that has raised huge families is then overpowering one of a worldview that didn't even value its children? And then we see why we have been overrun. We will only be defeated if we lose our moral strength and our moral basis. We will not be defeated because of politics or military power. We can be defeated if we lose our moral framework. So speak with moral conviction and clarity, but always with love. And that is the biggest persuader of any counter perspective. That's what I would say here.
Thank you so much. God bless.
I'll add just a quick affirmation of what Ravi's already said to your point, but first just thank you all for having me and giving me your ear during this time of question and answer. I read somewhere that the number 2 fear in the world is death, and the number 1 fear is public speaking. I do have a Yankees fan in the front row. That makes me feel a bit more at home, so I appreciate that. At least there's one here. Sorry, it's my dad's fault. It's not my fault. Just a quick affirmation of what Ravi has said to that point. You know, we all take our political starting point. We go right back to the Declaration of Independence that all people are created equal. And if that is the starting point of any plausible morality, that every single person has an equal value, that their rights are universal, inalienable, and equal, well, then there has to be something about every single human person which is in fact equal and which is completely unchanging. And so my question would just be, what is it? What is it about you and the people sitting next to you and every single person that's completely equal and completely unchanging? If you have a naturalistic worldview, it is really hard to answer that question. Anything naturalistic is along a spectrum. Some are more or less intelligent than others. Some are more or less happy than others. Some are more or less good at passing on their genes than others. What is it that is equal and undeniable and constant for every single person? And I think the only answer to that question is the love of God. The love of God is the only thing about you. It's the only thing about every one of us which is absolutely equal for every single person and which cannot change no matter what. It cannot be earned and it cannot be lost. So just to affirm what Ravi has said, as we get into political discussions, let's let that be our starting point. And let's not be afraid to ask that question. Because if we're all agreed that that should be the starting point, we should be able to challenge people and ask that question. What is it that makes you and me and every single person absolutely equal? What is equally true and constant and cannot be lost about us, which grounds all of our political convictions? And hopefully that leads to some good conversations.
Next question.
Thank you very much for coming here today. I've been listening to your radio broadcast since, well, before I could walk, and your ministry has really impacted my life, impacted my own view of the gospel and my own way of explaining things, so I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to come to the Philly area. I am a physicist. I'm a graduate student at the University of Delaware, and in my discipline, facts are empirical. There are things that we can see, that we can touch, and I have a hard time explaining to my colleagues who are used to thinking in this empirical vein how they can understand philosophical truth or how they can understand a God that they can't see. How do I respond to them and give them something tangible to hold on to about the gospel message?
Great question, and I'll be happy to do it. In our recent book, Jesus Among Secular Gods, I've made the comment that Vince's chapter on scientism is worth the price of that book. He really deals with the solid sciences, and your question is very, very pertinent and very real. We deal with this with faculty members. We speak across the globe with them. I'd like Vince to communicate with you on that, and I will put a footnote to it as well, but I think he does it so well that I think you'll find it more meaningful.
This is a question that I get really excited to speak to, because I think there's often this assumption that somehow science has disproved God, somehow science has buried God. And I was on a show not long ago, and that was the assumption underlying the entire conversation, and I was on the edge of my seat. I couldn't wait to get in because I think it's so not true. You asked specifically the question of how you can get someone to believe in things that aren't physical in nature. Well, there are lots of things like that in science and also in philosophy, which you mentioned. Gravity, numbers, sets, propositions. Most philosophers today are actually not materialists precisely because of some of these reasons. But my primary encouragement on this question would be, all right, meet people where they are. Let's start with the empirical then. Let's start with the sciences, and let's ask that question. Has science pointed away from God? I don't think it's the case. arguably the two most significant discoveries in all of cosmology in the last 100 years point strongly to the existence of God. The first one, that the universe has a beginning. Go right back to the beginning of Genesis. People didn't believe that, and it was discovered, and some of the greatest scientists struggled to believe it because they realized how well it would cohere with the Christian faith. And if you have a universe that didn't exist and then came into existence, you have to account for that change. What could cause that? What could be powerful enough and creative enough to cause that? The second discovery in cosmology, that the universe is incredibly finely tuned for life. The way the universe needs to be, in order for life to be possible, not just life as we know it, not just life on the planet Earth, but anywhere in the universe, the probability of that on just natural assumptions is incredibly, incredibly small. Some scientists put it as 1 part in 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123. If I were to try to write that probability out for you, I couldn't, because I would need more zeros than there are particles in the universe. One scientist likens it to a tornado going through a junkyard and just happening to produce a perfect airplane. How can we account for this? The probability based on chance is almost nothing. But what if it's the case that you have someone who's powerful enough and creative enough and intelligent enough and loving enough to desire to create human persons and to call them into relationship with himself? Interestingly, I saw an interview with Richard Dawkins where he called it a very interesting hypothesis, the idea that life on Earth could have been seeded here by aliens from a different universe. And I couldn't believe it. When I heard it, I thought, wait a minute. Richard Dawkins is not against intelligent design. Actually, he just has a very specific bias against divine design. Let me just take this one step further. The very basis of all science, the regularity of the universe, the fact that we can expect that in the next second and the next minute and tomorrow, gravity, for instance, is going to have exactly the same strength. Why do we just assume that? Somebody might say, well, that's the way it's always been. But that's not an answer, that's the question. Why has it always been the same? And why can we assume it's always going to be the same in the future with perfect regularity? I actually think on logic alone, you have no answer to that question. Einstein said the universe's incomprehensibility, the greatest incomprehensibility, is that it is comprehensible. Why do we have this regular universe that we can actually perform experiments on and discover scientifically? I think only God makes sense of that. And so bring that into the conversation. Maybe it's the case not only that science hasn't disproved God, but that only God proves science. I hope that's helpful.
I just want to add a brief footnote to that, because in my semester at Cambridge, I had two very interesting faculty members. One was Don Cupid, who was an Anglican priest turned atheist, and John Polkinghorne, who was a scientist who was an atheist turned Christian. And John Polkinghorne was one of the leading quantum physicists of his time, remarkable professor. I'm sure you would know the name. And what I came to the conclusion about, ultimately, it's not so much about the evidences. It's the willingness to go where the evidence leads. If you're really willing to go where the evidence leads, and if it calls for humility and the bending of your knee, the difference will actually and ultimately come there. You see, in the sciences, as a physicist or as a lab technician or whatever, science can tell you what happens when this is joined to that, or when this is added to that. Nowhere in science does it tell the technician that they must tell the truth. That's not a scientific imperative, that is a metaphysical imperative. So immediately when you move from science into metaphysics, you come into the real world of why you love your children, why you wish to be loved, and why the truth matters. Nicholas Walterstorff, marvelous professor from Yale, after he lost his son and it crushed his heart, made this incredible comment: when we have overcome absence with phone calls, winglessness with airplanes, summer heat with air conditioning, when we have overcome all these and much more besides, then there will abide two things with which we must cope: the evil in our hearts and death. The answer to those two will not come from science. It comes from knowing the very creator of the universe, who explains your heart and raised his son from the dead for you and for me. Yeah.
Should I go ahead? Hi, I'm Sogat Dawari, and I grew up in Kathmandu, Nepal. And there, I grew up in a society where the religion was totally different from Christianity in the United States. So my question is, why is Christianity true and other religions false? Because there are many miracles in other religions as well, similar to those in Christianity. Thank you.
Thank you for asking that. You come from Nepal?
Yeah.
I see. How long have you been here?
7 months.
Wow. You're yet to be born. 2 months more to go.
Well, I've been born for 19 years.
That's great. Hindi bolte ho? No Hindi.
Hindi bhi bolta hu.
Bolte hain. Theek hai. So I will answer it to you in Hindi. Will that be all right? No, I won't do that. Okay. You know, your question haunted me for a long, long time. Because I was born in Chennai, South India, was raised in Delhi. My ancestors were Nambudris, that come from the highest caste of the Hindu priesthood, deep in Kerala. When Thomas the Apostle went to India, he was the one to whom Jesus said, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes unto the Father except through me." Pretty drastic statement. He went to India, the land of 330 million deities, and preached the message of Jesus. And he ultimately paid with his life. The reality about truth is that truth, by definition, is exclusive. Whether we like it or not, truth is exclusive. You may think, for example, Hinduism often says it's an all-accommodating religion. It isn't. It is not all-accommodating, and you know it well. Every Hindu believes in two things: karma and reincarnation. They may have huge differences, but the law of the cyclical rebirth of life and the karmic cycle and the reincarnation are realities within Hinduism. People think Buddhism was very ironic and very accommodating. Not true. Gautama Buddha was born a Hindu, and he rejected the caste system and rejected the authority of the Vedas. That's when he came with his fourfold truth and the eightfold truth and for the noble path, the noble path and the fourfold truth of the problem of suffering, the reality, and how you extinguish it. Every religion is exclusive. Every religion. Hinduism excludes, Buddhism excludes. You know, it's very interesting. In India right now, they have this new movement. You may have heard it. Ghar Vapas Aa. Come back to your home. Ghar Vapasi. You were converted, come back. Why? If all views are ultimately the person's expression, why come back? Because they believe their own religion is exclusive and ought to be protected. The question is not whether religions are exclusive or not. The question is, what can they answer to defend that truth? If you move from Hinduism from the Vedas into the Gita, where Arjuna is talking to Krishna in that great conversation where Arjuna is going to fight his own brothers, and he doesn't know the chariot driver is Krishna. and he's asking him for advice on how I can go and fight my own brothers and kill them. He doesn't know who Krishna is, but he's giving the advice. Through the conversation of the Gita, Krishna talks about the Prajapati, which literally ends up meaning the sacrifice. You ultimately need that sacrifice. But in the Gita, there is no sacrifice. He was on to the truth that there was the need. Only in the gospel is that sacrifice offered for you and for me. Why is Jesus the way, the truth, and the life? Because he answers the 4 questions with correspondence as truthful and coherence as the 4 coherent answers. It is for this reason that people like Carey and Charlie C.T. Studd and Henry Martin and others, when I go to India several times a year, hum dharti ke aadmi hai. Hum dharti ke aadmi hai. I'm a person of the soil. I was born and raised in India. India has a fascinating philosophy. There's a song that you may have heard from Mother India, Duniya mein hum aaye hain to jeena hi padega, jeevan hai agar zahar to peena hi padega, which literally means if I've come into this world, I must live. If living means drinking poison, I must drink it. The fatalism that is present in many of the young, they are hungering for answers. It is not so much the robust attitude of smothering somebody, but the privilege of telling them that Jesus Christ offers his sacrifice for you so that you can have life with purpose. Mahatma Gandhi, who carried a New Testament all his life, made this comment, I like their Christ, I don't like their Christian, because the Christians had victimized him in so many ways. We as Christians need to apologize to the world for the way we have sometimes betrayed the trust. But we do not go to present ourselves. We go to present Christ. If you had the cure for cancer, you would not be sitting at home. You'd be telling the world with cancer where the cure is. In Jesus, you find the answers to the deepest questions of the soul, and you present him as the answer. I'll leave that with you. I'll leave you with 2 footnotes. Why Jesus? I've responded in 1 chapter to the very question you've raised, and also Jesus among other gods. You will see the coherence of his answers. All religions claim exclusivity. I believe in Jesus. You see the reasons for that exclusivity, because he describes my condition, provides for the malady, explains suffering, teaches me what the cross is about, and rose again from the dead to give me eternal life. That is what I present to the Indian people, and I hope you will follow those teachings too.